Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Steph and today we are doing another weekly reading vlog. I think this week is going to be kind of fun because I will be mood reading my way through the week for the most part. But also on my Patreon, we are doing the second annual Camp Witchwood. This is just a little readathon that I do on my Patreon in the summertime. This year I made it a week long and we have like little badges that we can collect for just finishing books. That's simply what it is. I wanted to make it as easy as possible this year because I know a lot of us have been struggling through readathons. Also, the tarot readathon is happening. The Romantasy Summer Challenge is still happening. So I'm kind of trying to fulfill things here and there for all of these readathons. But for the most part, I really want to mood read. So I have actually already started 2 books. I'm not far into one of them. And then the other one I have been listening for the last couple of days and I am 30% exactly into it, and that is The Goddess of Nothing at All. This is the love story of Loki and Sigrid, I think is how you say her name. I know I'm saying it wrong. When I listen to the audiobook again, I will get the correct pronunciation, but this is supposed to be a retelling of their love story, and it's actually from her perspective specifically. I don't know that much about Norse mythology, I'm gonna say right now, so I'll probably sound really ignorant when I'm describing this book and like the things happening in this book because I don't follow Norse mythology very much, but it's something I'm extremely interested in. I just have never actually studied anything about it because this whole time I was like, aren't Thor and Loki like brothers in some capacity? But like Thor is our main character's brother, so I don't really know. I don't know anything. I don't know shit about shit. That being said, I am liking this one. It's a bit slow. We're 30% in and the love story is kind of already unfolding. Apparently the second half of this book is pretty dark and gruesome, and I did see somebody on Goodreads describe this more as a fantasy romance where the romance is intertwined in the fantasy of this world, but it is pretty fantasy forward, and I can see that. We've gotten a lot of time exploring character dynamics and this world for the most part, but there has been a really good foundation for the romance, and I think Loki is such an interesting character because again, I don't know much about Loki outside of like movies and television references, and I know that he's supposed to be a trickster god, I believe, and that's very prevalent in this book, and a lot of people don't like Loki, so this romance almost feels forbidden in so many ways, but there's also some darkness to it. The writing is really beautiful, but like I said, this is pretty slow, so it's not something I've been reaching for very often. Like I listen to it on my commutes, but it's just so slow that I'm not quite in the mood to like invest myself completely in this world right now. So because of that, I ended up starting Glint by Raven Kennedy last night before bed, and this is the second book in the Plated Prisoner series. In my last vlog, I ended up reading Guild and I liked it way more than I thought that I would. I was so surprised at how absorbed I got into the world and how connected I got to the characters in such a short time. I said in that video that Guild really reads like a prequel, and so far I don't really know what page I'm on because I've been reading it on my Kindle, so it looks like I'm about 36 pages into the book so far, and I really like the start of this one, so I'm gonna be reading this one physically because there is no audiobook for the rest of this series. I don't know how fast I'm gonna get through this. Physically reading recently has been pretty slow for me. So if you don't know anything about the Plated Prisoner series, this is actually a King Midas retelling, and our main character Orin is basically King Midas's prisoner, but she's a prisoner by choice, and he has turned her to gold, so her entire body is gold from head to toe. I have a hard time picturing it. She also is supposed to have these things called ribbons, which I think are like little tentacles coming out of her back. Also have a very hard time picturing that. But yeah, in the first book there was a lot of establishing moments, like the relationship between Orin and Midas and like how they got to the point where she is kind of his willing prisoner, if you could call it that. But we also find out about a lot of the different relationships surrounding these two, like the relationship between Midas and his wife. We get to see some political machinations and the relationships that Midas has with other kingdoms, and we get to see a catalyst to the plot, which I think is going to ignite the plot for the rest of this series. So I'm very interested to see how it goes because the ending of Guild was kind of cliffhangery, and so far 36 pages in, we haven't seen much of the repercussions of what happened at the end of that book, but the way that this started out, I need to know more. I really need to know more, and I'm very excited to dive further into this one. So those are 2 books that I'll definitely be reading this week. Everything else is kind of up in the air. I may just continue with the Plated Prisoner series, but I do have a couple other books that I really want to read. I am desperately wanting to read Powerless for whatever reason. Like I desperately want to read it. So that's potentially a book that I pick up as well, but we will see. It's another Thursday. It's another day of me cleaning my house, but also Jared is very sick right now, so I cleaned all of the bedding, all of the blankets, all of the towels, and hopefully that'll help from me getting sick. That all being said, I actually finished a book yesterday and I have nonstop been thinking about it, so it's been harder for me to get into anything else, even though I have started 2 other things. I'm just having a hard time getting into those things because I keep thinking about The Goddess of Nothing. I finished it. I actually finished it yesterday at work. I had like 2 hours where I was doing a bunch of Baker and Taylor ordering, and I was like prepping a craft for my story time on Saturday. And so I was able to get through all of that stuff, and I finished the audiobook, and I just kind of like sat there and I was cutting my little pig craft in silence because that book was really beautiful. It was really, really dark and very tragic, and it actually took me many days to get through simply because of how dark it was and how like it was non-stop tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. And our poor character, Sigrid, I want to root for her, but I also want to slap her. You know what I mean? Like those characters where it's like, I'm rooting for you. We were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. But I do think in the second half of the book, her character arc takes a turn that I don't particularly love, but I'm very curious what's gonna happen in the second book just based on how this one ends. And it's interesting because this first book almost reads like its own narrative, and I'm curious like what's gonna happen in the second book because there are loose ends, of course, but like it's not enough for me to know where the story is gonna go in a second book. That being said, I don't really know anything about Norse mythology, so I'm sure there are a lot of things that like went over my head. It's probably very obvious where the story is gonna go, but I will say that despite all of that, I do think that this was very easily digestible. And despite not knowing specific gods other than like name only, it was very interesting to kind of get to know them. And I'm not saying that this book does like the most amazing job giving you a background about these characters, but I think because they're so prevalent in our main characters' lives, both Loki and Sigrid, that it's easy to get to know them and kind of understand what they do for the realm and what they do for these gods and what they provide for these gods. But also it was just extremely interesting seeing their relationship with Loki and with Sigrid, and also the fact that like everyone hates Loki, but Sigrid is so die-hard for him that a lot of her friends and family start to kind of come around to him a little bit because of that. But like he does things at every turn that you're like, Loki. Overall, this just made me very curious about Norse mythology and about Sigrid's story in general, because the way this ends, it's like, can a bitch get a break? To be fair, I think some of the things that happen in here are definitely both Loki and Sigrid just being bad at decision making and also just like really in love with each other. God. A couple interesting things about this book is how queer it is. I actually thought that this was a sapphic romance, and it isn't per se. It's more so that Loki is gender fluid, which I thought was really, really awesome. And we get to see that fluidity and how it's interwoven into their relationship. Sigrid is bisexual, and there's discussions of her being bisexual prior to being with Loki. And then there are a couple other characters who are queer. And I do think that that was an interesting topic because on one hand, it was very normal in here. It was just like a normal aspect of day-to-day life, which I always love. But there was discussions about homophobia, specifically towards gay men, and how that prejudice didn't actually extend to women being with women. And that was a very interesting conversation. There was like actually a whole conversation about why they think that is and like the issue they take with that, both Loki, Sigrid, and a couple other characters that you meet. Also, I think the writing was so beautiful in here. It was very lyrical, but it was also just, I don't know. The only thing that I can say is that this book kind of gave me the vibes of like Madeline Miller, like what Madeline Miller is doing in the Greek mythology world. I feel like this is on that same level, and I would hesitate to say that this is a fantasy romance, although it is. Like the romance is the core of this book. The romance, this love story, is the whole purpose behind everything that's happening. Like the choices that our 2 main characters are making are specifically because of the love that they have for one another and the family that they've created. But at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily say or categorize this as like a fantasy romance. I feel like this is just a really tragic romance. It kind of gave me the vibes of Song of Achilles, where there is a romance that is at the core of the story, but it's like more tragic. It's not this beautiful happily ever after. And maybe I would have recognized that if I would have known more about Norse mythology. But again, I don't. So I went in very ignorant, and maybe that was my mistake. So anyway, I would hesitate to call it fantasy romance. I would say that it falls under that category of Song of Achilles. Anyway, this was really, really beautiful. I do wish I had more background on Norse mythology, and I have been researching, but I am having trouble rating this because on the one hand, I loved it. Like I really, really enjoyed is not the right word, I guess, but I really enjoyed this. Like I was trying to slowly absorb the story. I loved the writing. I really enjoyed how well fleshed out the characters were. Like I felt them on page. But on the other hand, I feel like certain things were a little bit slowly paced. It's a very slow burn, this book. But that being said, overall, I just really, really loved this, and I thought it was extremely beautiful. And obviously me having a harder time getting into a book now means that it left a lasting impact on me, but I don't know how to rate it. So I'm not gonna rate it at this point in time, but just know that I enjoyed it, and I do recommend it. I more so highly recommend it for people who do like Madeline Miller and like these types of retellings, because I think if you don't, you'll have a hard time getting into it. It's fairly slow, like I said, but the writing is very beautiful. It's lyrical. I think the characters are so well developed. And I think that if you love these types of retelling, Greek, Norse, otherwise, that are from the women's perspective and really focus on the women in these stories, then this will probably be for you. There was a Goodreads review that I read that said, I feel like I stumbled over a hidden gem, and I definitely feel that way about this. I wasn't really expecting it from this book, and I don't know, I was just really pleasantly surprised. So anyway, if y'all have read this, please let me know down below what you think of it. Just be mindful of spoilers, or you can message me on Instagram if you do have like spoilery thoughts about it, because I'd really be interested in other people's reviews. There wasn't really anyone that I follow or that I was friends with on Goodreads or Storygraph that have read this. And so I'm just curious about other people's reviews, because I was reading some on Goodreads of people that I don't know who they are, but like I liked a lot of their reviews. So when I finished that yesterday, I took a pause from reading for the rest of the day until I was driving home. And when I was driving home, I ended up starting Powerless because my audiobook came through, and I've just been desperately wanting to read this. Like all of the hype about Reckless, I think is the name of the second one. I've just been really wanting to read this. So I ended up getting like maybe 50 pages into it. The setup of it so far feels like a lot of the YAs that I've read before. However, I'm really excited about the competition that's probably gonna take place in this one. I don't know if it takes place in the first one or if it takes place in the second one, but I'm very much looking forward to the competition that's being alluded to here. This is also very interesting because there was like a plague that happened, and this plague ended up giving people powers, but not all people were lucky enough to get powers. And those people are considered ordinaries, and now in this world under a new king, this king has decided that all ordinaries must die, like that they're a plague in and of itself. And so our one main character, Aden, she is an ordinary, and she's obviously trying to hide that. And our secondary main character is Kai, and he is the prince, but he is also the enforcer of getting rid of these ordinaries. And so in the beginning of this book, like we've come to find out about the plague, we're finding out about Aden being ordinary and how she steals to survive so that nobody knows she's an ordinary. And then Kai, we kind of see him have to do his duty of getting rid of ordinaries. And you know, he's one of those princes that like doesn't like what he has to do, but he has to do it to survive, you know, that kind of setup. So I'm interested, I'm intrigued, but it was just a little bit hard to get into this one after reading The Goddess of Nothing. So this morning I decided to start Glint, and I actually had started the first 2 chapters, I think, at the beginning of this vlog, and I may have said that. I just reread them last night, and now I'm on chapter 4, and I think I'm actually gonna spend the rest of the day reading this one instead of Powerless, because I'm really into it, and I was already kind of acquainted with the world, so it's easier for me to get into this. Also, I do like the writing in here. I mean, obviously it pales in comparison when you've read something that feels kind of like masterpiece level writing, but I still like the writing in here, and I have a lot of intrigue, you know, after reading that first book. So hopefully I can make a really big dent into it, but I don't know, I get really distracted on reading sprints. I don't know what it is about reading sprints. I'm never productive. I'm not.
Looking for my shadow in the dark. What happens if I look for you, the compass and my tennis shoes, and find you holding someone else's heart? I'm sleeping on your bedroom floor. I'll let my feelings wash ashore. You told me I'm projecting and I don't move with much direction anymore. I don't know what I'm looking for. I can't believe I care. Soon I wanna pinky swear. I'm leaving, I'll call you when I'm there.
Hello friends, I am headed to Target because where else would I be going? I mean, actually I'm going to Target because I need to get Jared some medicine. I need to get an extra COVID test and I need to get some more masks, but don't worry, I already have this mask. And also don't worry, I have tested negative 3 separate times, but I do have to take a test tomorrow evening just to check in to make sure that I can go to work on Monday. So far I've been fine. And Jared's been quarantined, so we're doing good, but I feel really bad for him because he is struggling. Anyway, that being said, I'm going to Target, which is very exciting for me. I will definitely get some bevies because that's my favorite part of going to Target, is getting new beverages for the house. I'll probably get some snacks. I do need to get a few things for the next couple of nights for dinner, and I need to get a new reusable cup because mine broke the other day. So this is a wonderful excuse to get a new reusable cup. Also, I haven't really updated, but I did start Powerless. I'm almost 200 pages into it and I can't lie, it was the worst of times. It was the worst of times. I'm actually not hating it. It's very much reminding me of Red Queen and Hunger Games. Like, it's giving strong Red Queen and Hunger Games vibes. Like, that's the inspiration, that's the blueprint type of thing. And I'm not hating that. Like, I loved both of those books actually when I read them. And it doesn't really bother me as a reader anyway when things are similar to other works of literature. It's just that this is so easy for me to put down. This is very put downable for me. And it's sad because I was actually very excited about this series. And I was especially excited because everyone has been loving the second one more than the first one. I just think that so far this was a little bit too long as it is. It's almost 500 pages. And we now at 200 pages are getting into the trials. We're getting into kind of the meat of the story, I guess you could say. And I felt like the build up to the trials wasn't very interesting and it wasn't like very dynamic or well done. And so I'm just struggling through this book a little bit. Part of me wants to DNF it, but the other part of me would really like to see where the series is going because, again, I really did love the Hunger Games and I really did love Red Queen. So I'd love to have another series that I enjoy as much as those, but I don't think that this is going to be that because I was really into the Hunger Games and Red Queen from the beginning. To be fair to myself, to be fair to this author, to be fair to the series, I'm a very different reader than I was back then, so maybe that's part of it. Maybe if I had picked up Hunger Games and Red Queen now, I would have very different feelings about them. So I'm not giving up quite yet, but it's not out of the realm of possibility for me to DNF this, or at the very least not move on. I agree with people when they say like you should go into this thinking it's a silly goofy time, because it does feel kind of like a silly goofy time. It does feel very low stakes despite the fact that there's a competition happening and like our main character is in a very precarious situation because she doesn't have powers, and as I explained, like if you don't have powers, the king is trying to eliminate powerless people. But we've kind of already seen in the beginning, like the very beginning, that our main character is kind of special in some types of ways, which, you know, isn't uncommon either for YA or really any fantasy series. I think we're either going to learn some things about our main character that go against what we've already kind of established about her, or there's going to be like some sort of rebellious type situation that happens. Those are my predictions. I don't actually know any of that for sure. So yeah, I mean, I'm not hating it, but I'm not like enamored with it. It's very easy for me to put down. So I think later tonight I am going to pick up a different book. I just don't know what that is. I know I've been reading Glint, but it's been hard for me to get into at the moment. I think it's my brain, but I kind of want something a little bit different. I think I need a palate cleanser. So I've been thinking about picking up Evocation by S.T. Gibson. And as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to pick that up while I'm at Target.
'Cause baby, like, ooh, it's all another flower lay. The sun goes around the state. Can't wait for the long day. 'Cause baby, like, ooh, it's all another flower lay. The sun goes around the state. Can't wait for the long day. In the sun when
Hello friends, so I finished Powerless last night and I don't know, I don't really have a rating. Like, I think if I had a rating it would be a really low 3 stars, and it actually has nothing to do with the fact that this reminded me of a lot of other YA series. I said it before, that doesn't really bother me. I mean, unless they're like legit plagiarizing, it doesn't really bother me. But I think with this one, it's one of those situations of I liked it, didn't love it, I can see why people love it, but it didn't fully work for me. I think the villain reveal was very lackluster, very mustache twirling villain monologue situation, and I just really struggle with that these days. I feel like we need more. We need more when somebody's a villain. We need more substance. We need more clarity besides this random monologue where you're trying to kind of throw in a twist. It's supposed to be really shocking, but it doesn't feel authentic because we don't know the motivations. We haven't seen hints at the fact that this person is potentially evil, or like we're hearing about it, but we're never really seeing it. You know what I mean? Like, we've heard stories about this person, but like, we don't know them. We're not interacting with them. So it just felt like it was supposed to be this curveball that was shocking. It didn't feel like a curveball. It didn't feel that shocking. It felt quite predictable, simply from reading a lot of YA fantasy. I know that on my channel, a lot of people look at my content and think that I read specific things, but I have read a lot of YA. Like, before I even got really into adult fantasy, YA fantasy was my gateway. Like, I've read a lot of YA fantasies and I've loved them. I've actually really struggled with my relationship with YA fantasy more recently, that I've been kind of falling off of it, which is why you see me continuing to try YA fantasies, because I loved them in the past. And I get that's a part of growing up and like your tastes changing, but I still really want to love these really popular and beloved YA books. I actually went into this one really excited, and I ended up being really disappointed. And I think part of that is on me, but part of that is just the hype surrounding this book. And again, I didn't hate it. I think it's a silly, goofy time. I think you're gonna see a lot of really familiar, fun tropes. And again, I really loved the books that this book particularly was reminding me of, which is Red Queen and The Hunger Games. As a matter of fact, I actually now often very much look for competitions in books. I do love a love triangle. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I have fun with it. I think it's a fun time. It's silly, it's goofy, and I think that yes, you can go into this and like it, and I see why people like it. But for me, it just felt a bit predictable. I didn't really love the writing. I didn't really connect to the characters. I liked Kai, our prince. Like, we've seen his story many times within YA fantasy, where he's the broken prince, the secondary prince who is forced to be an assassin or a killer or do things that he doesn't want to do. But again, because I didn't connect fully to the story, a lot of things just didn't hit me the same way that I thought that they would. There was a death in here that did actually harm me, okay? I was unwell. It harmed me, and I was emotionally very distraught. But otherwise, I'm left feeling disappointed about this one. I'm curious about the trajectory of this book, because there are a lot of elements in here that are interesting. There's a lot of things that were done that I'm curious how they're going to be fleshed out. I think oftentimes in the first fantasy book, things feel familiar because we're setting up a lot of character dynamics, we're setting up a lot of tropes, we're setting up a lot of this world building and magic system. So things feel familiar in a first book generally, I think, across the board. So with that being said, I'm so curious about like where this is going, because that's where I think series start to solidify themselves as like its own individual thing, is with a second and a third book, or however long the series is. Like, the trajectory of the characters, the trajectory of the plot, the relationships, like that's where I think series start to become unique in their own. Because like a first in a series is always going to feel familiar. We're getting established in the world. I get that. So I would be willing to read the second one, because I'm definitely someone who will read a second book just to see if like I really want to give up on a series. So I feel like I'll definitely try to read this second series. I have the novella, so I'll probably read the novella for sure. But the second book, I'm not gonna buy it. I'm just gonna get it from the library and I'm gonna see. I have seen a lot of people though who have given the first book a fairly lower rating and end up giving the second book like 5 stars. So I'm not giving up hope, but I was disappointed by this. So that sucks, but you know, it is what it is. However, I did start Evocations yesterday like I said I was going to, and I'm only 5 chapters in, which isn't very far because I didn't read very much after I finished Powerless yesterday. I'm loving it. This is giving me, and please don't quote me on this, okay? But this is giving me adult Raven boys. And if you know me, you know I love the Raven cycle with my entire heart, with everything I have in me. I love the Raven cycle, okay? So yeah, 5 chapters in, having a grand old time, and I'm excited to see if it continues to give me the same vibes as the Raven Boys. Obviously, Raven Boys is YA, so like it's different because this is adult, but like mediums, ghosts, feeling like found family might be a thing here. I could be thriving. We could get a 5-star, which I haven't had in a little while, so I'm gonna go make lunch. Hi. I look rough because I had a rough day at work and I didn't sleep very well, but you know what? I finished a book. I finished Evocation and I'm giving this 4 stars. I am enamored with these characters. I love these characters so much. So here's the thing, I can totally see why if you are a lover of Dowry of Blood, this probably wouldn't work for you because the writing is so vastly different and the story is so vastly different. We're following 3 characters. We have 2 POVs, but it's mainly 3 characters. So we're following David, and David is a hotshot lawyer. He comes from a long line of money, and he also is a psychic prodigy. So at the very beginning of this book, we meet David as he's going to a client's house. He goes into this thinking this is going to be a very typical psychic reading for him, but very quickly realizes that something is off and ends up having a spirit take over his body for a short period of time. This is very unusual for him, so he decides that he's going to reach out to the one person he thinks could help him, who also happens to be his ex, and they have a pretty messy past. So our second POV is Reese, and we meet Reese as he's getting this text message from David basically asking him like, have you ever been possessed by a spirit before? Reese also dabbles in the occult, but more so his wife Moira, his new wife Moira, has a much better connection to the spirits. And so David is reaching out to Reese because it is the person that he trusts, but also this was a client that was sent to David from Moira. So we see that there's a bit of tension between the 3 of them, obviously because Reese and David have a very messy past. They were like college sweethearts and it just didn't end up working out. And then Reese suddenly shows back up on the scene married to this woman named Moira, and they seem to be madly in love, and they are. Like, oh my god, the moment you meet Reese, he like calls Moira his little goddess, and the way that he talks about her, the way that he is enamored with her is just like overwhelming, and I love every second of it. But there is a bit of tension between all of them. The thing is that Moira has said to Reese time and time again, and even throughout this narrative, that like, whatever you want, you can have it. I'm not stopping you from having all of the things that you desire in this life as long as you don't lie to me. That's her whole thing. So Reese ends up reaching back out to David, and they make this tentative alliance with one another because they sort of have a give and take. There's something that both of them could get from trying to figure out what happened to David. And along the way of them making this alliance, the dynamic between the 3 of them, the relationship that they all form is just incredible. It's show-stopping. I am enamored with these characters simply because they are so enamored with each other, the way that they describe each other, the way that they interact with each other. Even David and Moira's relationship is just like so tender, and I wasn't expecting it. Like, this could have gone in so many different directions, but the way that they interact with each other, and especially the way that both David and Reese talk about Moira, the way they almost like worship at her feet when they call her a little goddess, it's like they truly believe that, and it's just incredible to me. I think the thing that stops me from giving this a 5 stars, even though I absolutely love these characters, and you know, I'm so character driven, like I'm here for the characters. But it's funny, this feels like a setup book, which again, there is nothing wrong with that, but because of that, I felt like a lot of the action and a lot of the substance within the plot kind of took place at the end of this book, and we spent a lot of time sort of having the characters interact with each other and establishing this relationship and this dynamic, which I think is probably going to be really important moving forward with this series. But I would have loved to get a little bit more about the occult, a little bit more about David's background, because there's a lot of information that kind of is given to us about him being a prodigy and him being the shadow of his father and like his relationship with his father, but we don't dive deep into it, like deep enough into it. And there is a lot of action that happens towards the end of this book. Maybe if we would have had a deeper dive into that relationship and into his family, we would have benefited a little bit more from it. That being said, I'm excited to see where the series is going, and I'm hoping that as this moves forward, we are going to dive deeper into the things that I'm most curious about and like most want answers for. But I don't know, I loved this, and I gave Diary of Blood like a 3.5 stars. Absolutely understand why people are obsessed with Diary of Blood, but this just worked so much better for me. And I know I jokingly said that this is like adult Raven Boys. I mean, it does give me those vibes for sure, especially Moira's character. Her character really reminds me of a lot of the women that we get to see in the Raven Boys. And ultimately, I think it was the aspect of like psychics and the occult and like this charming group of characters, and the fact that it was character driven. I think that's more so what was reminding me of the Raven Boys. But I'm definitely not comparing the two in the sense of like, if you like one, you're gonna like the other. It just gave me those vibes and those feels. And I think that if you are character driven, this would probably work really well for you. I have a feeling though that if you liked A Diary of Blood and specifically the writing did something for you, this probably isn't gonna be your favorite. But wow, this was fun. This was definitely what I needed. This was the palette cleanser that I needed. So I'm so glad that I ended up picking this up. And I'm also just glad that I gave S.T. Gibson another shot. Not that I was like writing them off by any means, but I just didn't love A Diary of Blood the way that I wanted to. So I was hesitant to read this. And then I saw Erin and a couple of my patrons like really loving this book. So I'm glad that I gave it a shot. As for Glint, I ended up getting like 20% into it, and I kind of put it down just because I have not been in the mental headspace to like sit and concentrate on a physical book this week. So hopefully I can get more into that next week, but otherwise I didn't read any more of that. So I have no updates about it, except the 20% that I was reading I liked. I do think though, now that I'm reading it physically rather than listening to it, there are some overuse of similes and metaphors. I think we could tone them down a little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you. I can't lie, but I'm still very intrigued by this world and like where things are going. Still can't picture those tentacles though. I don't know what's going on with that. But anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me this week. Let me know down below what you've been reading and loving. You know I love to know what you're reading and loving, so we can discuss it down below. Let me know if you've read any of these. And if you've made it this far and have nothing else to say, feel free to leave the candle emoji down below, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye, friends.